Welcome to the second part of this episode of Beyond Sustainability with our guest, Stephane le Gentil. In case you missed the first part of the discussion, you can find it by clicking the link in the top right corner. The different discussion points are all timestamped throughout the episode, so you can freely move around as you see fit. When we're thinking about future investments, future retrofits, so as the technology that exists today, a building that is built today, for instance, that has all the highest standard energy efficient appliances, requirements, HVAC, lighting, everything that you could imagine. What would 15 years down the line look for them? Would they need to completely do retrofits themselves? Is there going to be maybe something that's more technologically advanced that will come into play? So we kind of use software more and more. How do you see this forming as we go for the next 15, 20 years?
Yeah, I'm sure that it's going to evolve the same way as what we've seen so far. So technology will evolve, and then you'll have maybe new ways of heating or cooling buildings that are not very common today, that are more efficient, that are very costly today, but tomorrow will be more affordable. You have new technologies that do exist today but that are not deployed because they are really too expensive or not mature enough, which we hope that in 15 years they will be very mass market, very mature, less expensive. So for me, it's mostly around technology improvements. Obviously, it's difficult to predict how it's going to evolve.
Of course.
It's also things that software, AI, typically today, for me, one of the big improvement that could be made is the systems that manage buildings, the BMS, building management systems that you have in big buildings. Most of them still work in a very traditional way. At 9 o'clock in the morning, switch on everything because everybody is in the office, and then after 5, switch off most of the things, etc., weekends. But you could have a lot more granular, I would say, way of looking at things, like room per room. Is there someone in the room? No. Then changing parameters for that room, switching off lights automatically. I think that's where things could really improve. And artificial intelligence have a role. There is a role there because to somehow predict or anticipate that the building will be used that way that day, which is different from the day before, etc. Today, the current BMS system don't know how to do this, but tomorrow maybe you will have these kind of things. Or it's also things like relating weather conditions with current conditions in the building and really optimizing the two. We know that tomorrow is going to be the weather is going to be more hot. You want to increase a little bit the air conditioning, but you don't want to do it too early because you would waste energy and people are not in the buildings. You use this combined with predicted number of people that would come to the building the day after. So there is a lot in terms of software management systems for buildings that I think can still be developed, that are not mature today or not existing today. Plus then the traditional technology improvement. Okay,
Right.
You have an air conditioning system that produces cooling, but using a certain number of kilowatt hours. Maybe in 10 years, to produce the same cooling, you'll require half the kilowatt hours just because it's using a different technology, doing things differently. Yeah, so I think on that side, there's still a lot of things that can be done. And I think one element that was seen is the remote work. With COVID, a lot of people have been working from home. A lot of office buildings have been empty. And initially, those buildings were behaving exactly the same way, as if everybody was in the office. And then people started to look at this saying, no, there's nobody in the building. So we need to really change the settings. And then people change the settings. But then today, you have a mixed situation. So depending on, obviously, company strategies, you have more or less people working from home, and how the office buildings adapt to this. I'm sure there is a lot of things that can be done, because I'm not sure this is properly managed today. If you have half the people in the building, I'm not sure that the buildings are being optimized for this. There's still maybe air conditioning the whole building where you only have half of the people.
I don't remember who I was speaking to. It was one of the technology companies. So he was trying to sell something to someone. But what he was saying was people look a lot at the efficiency of the HVAC units and how they're functioning, but they don't think so much about the controls and the thermostats for the larger buildings. He was saying, yeah, you can put up predictive numbers that are very accurate based on the expected, packs per in the building, number of people that are going to be in the building at any given time, and they could be precisely accurate. But you're not measuring the actual temperature correctly. So you're cooling more than you should be because the room itself or the building itself is actually cooler than you want it to be just because your thermostat isn't accurate. I think that's an interesting analogy to bring me to my question here is, I know that you're not really involved with the technology, so it's fine if you don't really know, but how much of this investment in retrofits from super ESCOs, from ESCOs, do you think should maybe be going into some of the smarter metrics for data gathering, sensors, some of the things that we maybe associate with smart buildings much more than with energy efficiency, but that could be tapped into that then, whether through the BMS and BEAM or whether through any other system, just make the building more energy efficient passively or indirectly? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it really depends. It's case by case, unfortunately, because each building is different equipments. And some buildings, it will be obvious that to make the biggest savings, you need to change the systems on the roof that produce cooling, for example. But some other buildings, you'll see that the system on the roof is pretty okay, was changed a few years back only. But then inside the building, yes, there are a lot of things that could be done. And that's where you would look at maybe improving the technology and adding additional elements that would optimize the way the cooling typically or the heating is being used inside the building. But that's really case by case. And you have also cases where you have, it's what I was mentioning a bit before, you have recent buildings with all the latest technologies, but because they were not properly commissioned, or because that technology, after a couple of years passed, people have been changing the settings, changing the system, disconnecting some things, it's not working anymore. And even if you have the latest, the greatest technology in the building, it's not making the work it's supposed to do. And therefore, sometimes it's just a matter of recommissioning, or I would say correcting all those issues, and then you will have a big improvement. Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of different technologies. Even light providers, they were light bulb providers. Typically, they are coming with lights that can identify if there is someone in the room, and then they can send the information centrally, and then you can. And in fact, it's true. You have in an office building, you have lights everywhere. So the lights can easily become a sensor and then monitor the entire building. And if you know how to use that information properly, then you can do a lot to improve. The question is around sensors. Yeah, you can install a lot of sensors. There is always a cost, so you need to be careful of. The more you install things, the more costly it becomes. So it's also, if the technology evolves into lower costs for this, then you can put more. And then it's how to exploit all those data. The mass of data is being generated in real time, and how to use the data to better manage the building and the equipment in the building.
Interesting. Okay. So I think a lot of times I think of some of the companies I worked in the past where everyone in the office disagrees on what the thermostat level should be. So if there's multiple people in the same room, but even then you will step outside of the office space into the hallway and it's freezing cold. And then you go to the next hallway and it's very warm. So it's almost like the left side of the hand doesn't know what the right side is doing. Almost just connecting all of that data surely would be more energy efficient if you don't even change the underlying technologies. I feel like that's something that should be looked into, at least. That isn't being done enough. Obviously, when you're looking at a building owner's perspective, again, it comes back to how much incentives do they have, right?
But it's also a question of maintenance, a question of who is maintaining the building and how knowledgeable those people are. Because you will have a situation where you have an extremely complex, sophisticated systems in a building, but if the people looking after it have no idea how this is being managed, then very quickly your electricity costs are going to increase. It's going to be a nightmare to manage. And then people, a situation that you described, people would go to where people scream. So if you scream because it's freezing cold, someone will come, don't know what to do, look at the roof, and then maybe fix something in the roof. You don't know what has been done. That's it, instead of knowing exactly the building and proactively trying to solve those issues. But having the proper management maintenance company also has a cost. So that's another issue that you'll find, is that in many buildings, at the end, it's a question of cost. How much does it cost to maintain the building? And some owners would just look for the lowest cost, and therefore they get a very poor service. And this has an impact on the electricity consumption, on the energy consumption.
Does the O&M, does the operations and maintenance company have an incentive to also maybe foster energy efficiency, or at least make sure that they are acting in the best way possible?
Yeah, that's more and more common for, I would say, not in small contracts, but in larger contracts. For buildings of a certain size, it's very common in the contract for the maintenance company to have an objective in terms of consumption of energy, with targets to reduce maybe 5%, 10%, 15% per year, with penalties, with these kind of things. Yes, it happens. And that's where you make the difference between also maintenance companies, and because some will know and will focus on these kind of things, and some others have no idea what to do.
But there's no policy for this, right? It's just a private sector discussion that you would have.
Yeah.
Okay. We talked about HVAC and central cooling. What are your thoughts on district cooling and the role that plays overall? Do you think it's going to change things massively if it's implemented more and more, or?
Yeah, I think district cooling works well when you have, and the same for district heating, because in France we also have district heating. In the city of Paris, in fact, for example, you have two networks. You have one for district cooling and one for district heating. So people can connect to the heating network during winter and to the cooling network during summer. I think it works well when the users are concentrated, meaning if you have a large building with a lot of maybe flats, then it's worthwhile to have central AC or central heating. It's less obvious when you have, for example, houses and you have a large network, because then you would have a lot of losses in the network, because by default, central cooling is more efficient than individual cooling, for sure. Plus, the maintenance is also reduced, because instead of having multiple small systems, you have one large system that is being looked at, that is redundant, that is properly maintained. But then you have a network, because you have the central system, and then you have a network to carry the cooling water or the heating water to the place where it's going to be used. And that's where you would have losses. If it's places where you have a lot of the use and the network is not too long, then that's a perfect solution, I think. But it cannot be used everywhere. A place where you have multiple villas that have a lot of space between them, such a system will not be efficient, because the losses in the network to bring the water to the different villas will not compensate the gains. But if you take, typically in Dubai, if you take downtown Dubai, it's only central cooling through district cooling, and that's a perfect case, because you have multiple buildings with a lot of flats. So it makes perfect sense to have such a system, because the network is very short. That's a perfect case.
And would it be, in a perfect scenario, it would be more efficient than, if you have the perfect environment for district cooling, it would be better than a normal single cooling system?
Yeah, because
or heating.
Getting a bit technical, but in district, when you use district cooling, you would use systems that are different from when you have individual cooling. For example, it's what we call water cooling or air cooling. So in a district cooling, you would use a water cooled system, meaning a system that produces cooling is also producing heat, and you have to reduce that heat. And one of the most efficient systems are using water to cool the system. So it's a water-cooled system. But then you have a lot of equipments. You have cooling towers. You use water. You need to ensure that the water is not getting polluted. So a lot of constraints that are such that you would not use a system like this for a simple villa. It would be a lot too costly. The system would be too costly. The maintenance would be too costly. So in a villa system, you would use a single system. Sorry, not necessarily villa. You would use a air-cooled system. So you use the air to cool the system, which is a lot simpler but a lot less efficient. So that's why by using district cooling, using water-cooled systems, you are by default a lot more efficient than individual smaller systems that use air-cooled system.
Okay, so it's just about dispersing it, but if that makes sense. I think in general, sprawl and villa-based housing are not the most energy efficient to begin with, right? So it's just another point for the larger buildings.
Yeah, and one of the things is also to the start of a project is not looking at how you're going to heat or cool the villa. It's more how you're going to isolate the villa from the outside weather. So the first step is really improving insulation. And that's where a lot of issues are, especially in countries in the Middle East. The building codes were not put in place, or they were put in place late. You still have a lot of buildings that exist that don't have insulation or don't have a proper insulation. That's the main issue. So the first thing to fix is really isolation. Leaks as well. This is typically something where there is a gap between the inside and the outside. The windows are not sealed or whatever, and then you have hot air that, in case of Europe, hot air would go outside during winter. In case of Middle East, the hot air would come inside during summer, and then you lose a lot. So isolating, fixing gaps. So that's the first thing to do. And then after that, when this is done, you can look at how to cool or how to heat the building.
Makes sense. Okay. I think that puts a perfect point on that. We talked a bit about 15, 20 years down the line, how the gradual improvements in these technologies is going to make a change. We talked about AI and software and whatever else that could mean. What about renewable energies? What are your thoughts on this? And I'll put a caveat that, I mean, everyone I've spoken to within the energy efficiency industry has always said, renewables should always be a secondary step. Once you've made the building as energy efficient as possible, when it's as good as possible, then you look into kind of adding to the net positive side of things. I think one adage I've heard is you have a boat that has a hole in it and you're trying to increase the speed by pedaling more, but the water keeps coming into your boat, so there's a leak. I think it's a good place to move from that. What are your thoughts on this overall? And then what do you think the future means for renewable integration within buildings, both for the commercial and residential side?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what you just said before. It makes sense. First, you look at what you can reduce. And then when you've reduced, then you can look at what you can switch. Because basically by putting renewable energy, local renewable energy, so on your roof or next to your building, what you're doing is switching from energy coming from the grid to your own energy. And that's how you basically reduce the consumption. It's just you avoid taking more electricity from the grid. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that needs to be done, especially now costs have been going down and down. So it's a lot more efficient. I think today, if you install a system, you will recover your money within 5 to 7 years. So you still always have the issue of the tenant that doesn't know how long he's going to stay. So maybe I'm not going to stay more than 3-4 years, so I'm not going to do this. But if you own a place and you think that you're going to stay, I think you need to, and if technically it can be done, because it's not always feasible, but done, it should be done. Today is very, very common. It's very easy to do, very common. Now you can even buy systems where I've seen that some time ago, but you buy panels and you just plug them into the outlet and then it generates electricity and feed your own house. It's not complicated. You just deploy them in your garden, you plug the outlet into your one socket in your home, and that's it. It's done. Produce electricity and feed your home, and if whatever you need additional will come from the grid. But it's becoming simpler and simpler to install those systems. Yeah, I think. And initially, it was one of the issues I've seen in the past is like people were, oh, energy efficient, I mean, I'm going to put panels. No, it's exactly what you said. No, first you look at what you can reduce, but then there was this issue of, yeah, but the panels, people will see that I've put panels, so it's good for my brand, it's good for my image, because it's easy to see, oh, look, they have put panels on the roof of that building. Wow. And that's one of the big issues of energy efficiency, is that it's not visible. It's invisible. Someone can have done a great project. Nobody will see anything because there is nothing visible. Okay, you've changed the chiller, but it's on the roof. Nobody will see it. Or it's in the basement. Nobody will see anything in the basement. Where solar panels, usually they are very visible, and people will make like adverts. Maybe not anymore, but initially people were putting, here we've put panels. So, wow.
Right. No, that's a very good point, though. Yeah.
But yeah, it's for me, it's, and on now the projects on which I'm working, it's always being considered as like the last measure is, okay, now we've looked at everything that can be reduced. Is there any place to put solar panels? What can we do? Plus, there is a lot of, so I will take again the case of France where I live now, but there is a lot of laws that start to flow also and they influence. And typically there is one coming soon. It's going to be mandatory like in 2 years' time. Any car park that has more than 80 slots, any car slots, mandatory will have to be covered with solar panels. Public or private or whatever. But if you have a car park that is open air, it's becoming mandatory to install solar panels. And this
Interesting.
similarly is putting a lot of action into the market.
Okay, so I have two questions on this. You said it's not always feasible. What are the shortcomings? What could make it not feasible to have a renewable integration, solar panels specifically, let's say, included into the plan for the building?
It could be a technical issue. It could be that because at the only place where you could put panels on the roof, there is a lot of shade. Because there are maybe some buildings next to your place, or because there are trees, or therefore it's not worth doing it because of the shade will forbid your panels to work properly. Or simply it can be not feasible. If you take a big tower like you have in Dubai, where the roof is very small, and on the roof you already have a lot of equipment to, maybe you have the chiller or you have other ventilation equipment or whatever, there is no space for panels. Or you would put a few square meters, but at the size of the tower, it does not change much. So there are technical limitations. Where it works best is on villas, because you have a villa and usually you have quite a roof that is not very busy on top. So then it's easy to put panels, and the size of the panel you can put compared to the consumption of the villa make it such that it's very interesting for the people that will live in that villa. And you mentioned the case, I think it's in Dubai, there is Sustainable City, where you have all the villas that were pre-equipped with panels. And there they've been demonstrating exactly what you said. And I know someone that lived there, he told me, most of the time his electricity bill is zero, because whatever he consumes is being produced by the panels on the roof. Okay, maybe in summer, during the few months in summer, then he has a lot more cooling consumption, and therefore he pays electricity, but most of the time it pays nothing. So for me, it's by default, this should be looked at. And today, for this, you have a lot of schemes for financing this. It's very standard, a bit different from ESCO models, but it's very easy to find people that will invest into solar panels and then finance it for you. And you buy the electricity. In fact, the system will be owned by them on your roof. So they will pay you a lease for using your roof. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is you commit on buying the electricity that is produced by the system over the long term at a price that is lower than what you would buy from the grid. So
That's so interesting.
So then for you don't invest anything. You're getting a small monthly fee from the lease, and you are also buying electricity at a lower price than what you get from the grid.
That's such an interesting model. But this is still for off-grid, right? Is there ways
No,
to
no, no.
integrate this into on-grid or?
Yeah, no, it's for on-grid because
Ah,
yeah. The rest
so they
you
sell the excess back to the grid?
yes.
Interesting. I had never heard of this model. So what do you call these kind of companies? I got to do some research now.
So I'm not sure now in the UAE it has been a little bit limited the way you can deploy solar. I think you can still do small systems given the I think it's given the electricity companies both in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, they've invested a lot into very large solar farms. So you will get anyway. I've read, by the way, I think in Dubai they just published the annual results for DIWA, the electricity company. They said that 15% of their electricity now is coming from solar.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. When I was there at the beginning, it was zero. So that's quite an improvement. But I think those companies, yeah, you need to look at companies that provide those kind of offers. I'm not too sure if all of them will not do it, but you'll find these kind of offers. Usually they focus on larger scale installation, so maybe on
Okay.
commercial buildings, but you need to look for maybe there are now companies doing it on the villa or I don't know. It's something,
Interesting.
but it's
Okay.
definitely something that we will see more and more because it's
Okay.
everybody wins.
Yeah, no, I mean that sounds like a very interesting model, and if it's
Mm.
on grid, then it removes all the kind of challenges they do face. We talked about rooftop solar. What about other types of solar? First of all, I've seen some things about the solar films. I think they're called that go on the windows. Obviously, they have limited daylight visibility. Do you think those could potentially be feasible as well if the cost drops, or no? It's all about the rooftop
You
solar at
mean
the moment.
solar films to produce electricity or solar films
Yeah.
to isolate?
No, to produce the solar film PVs.
Okay, yeah, but that's typically new technologies that
Okay.
are still very expensive, but maybe in a few years' time they will become more mainstream. And then maybe some windows will come by default with the film installed, and you'll connect the window with some wires to. So let's see. Yeah. I think it's definitely a possibility. Again, it will be limited to windows that are exposed to sun, etc., etc. But yeah, there is also yeah. If you speak of solar technologies, there is solar hot water. We don't speak too much about it, but it's in some countries it's mandatory. I think now in Dubai it's mandatory in all the new construction. So you need to have solar hot water. It's same in France, by the way. All new buildings need to have solar hot water. Sometimes it does not produce a lot of hot water, but it's quite cheap to install. So it's simple things that can be installed that will avoid to heat the water from using electricity from the grid. There were also, I've worked a little bit with a company that was doing flexible films. So the idea
Okay.
was because most of the panels today are, quite rigid. So they are flat and rigid. So they need to be installed in a certain way. But there are now companies working on solar films that are flexible. So then they can be adapted to buildings that have very specific roofs. If you take a mosque where the roof is quite like a dome, maybe you will be able to put a solar film on the dome. Yeah, these
Interesting.
things also can be interesting.
Okay, so outside of solar, I'm guessing there's other renewable integration potentials for residential and commercial buildings.
Yeah, there are so two things. So there is wind, but wind, small scale winds, I've not seen it really anywhere. And some people do it, but it's not really main market. I think really solar. But then you have also geothermal. So not much in the Middle East, but in Europe it's quite common to do geothermal. Even for at the size of a villa, you have a heat pump, and then you have some pipes that are being installed in your garden, like 2 or 3 meters below the surface. And then in summer, you use the fact that it's cooler under the earth, that level, to produce cooling. And in winter, it's the reverse with the heat pump. You can recover calories from there to heat your home. So this is becoming more and more common as well. This is something I had looked at when I arrived in Dubai, but it's very. I've not seen this being used so much, and I don't really know why. I think technically there must be some limitations, but in countries where the weather maybe is less extreme, then it's extremely interesting, and especially because you can produce cooling and heating, and that would be considered as renewable because you use electricity from the grid to feed the heat pump, but the heat pump would consume maybe 1/3 of a conventional heating or cooling system.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. So outside of residential and commercial buildings, I don't want to touch too much on industrial because it's a discussion in and of itself. But what about the industrial sector? Obviously, they play a big role in different countries to different degrees. But more and more, I think China now, the industrial sector is the biggest user of energy, for instance. It's becoming a higher number in the Middle East. I'm sure it's also a high number in mainland Europe and in US. What are the unique challenges and more importantly, what are the unique opportunities for that sector to do both energy efficiency and renewable energy integration across the board?
Yeah. I think the case of industrial is different, especially because in most cases, energy is part of their core business. Most of the industrial will use energy in their core business. So the cost of energy has an impact on the cost of what they produce. So for them, it's absolutely necessary to manage and reduce the cost of energy because it will help them to be more competitive, because it will help their products to be more competitive on the market. So today, I think most industrials have been managing this already. And it's very different in the sense that some industrial, like the heavy consumers, glass manufacturers or steel or aluminum or cement, those people that use really a lot of electricity or a lot of energy as part of their process, they've been looking at this for years. So usually they've done a lot of improvements, but still you have some opportunities. I remember my recent years when I was in the UAE, we did a project with a cement manufacturer where we put in place a heat recovery system. Mm-hmm. So their process is generating heat. So we've added a system to recover that heat, feed the turbine, and the turbine was producing electricity, and we were feeding back the electricity to the cement plant. So that's typically one thing that can be done in all processes that generate heat. You can have a system that recovers heat and produce electricity from that heat. Usually the heat is just released in the air. You need a certain temperature, you need a certain volume. But if the conditions are there, you can put a system that recovers heat, produce electricity, and then therefore you use less electricity from the grid. So it's a benefit. But then, problem of industrials is that it's extremely specialized because each process is different. So many industrials will have their own proprietary process. So usually they are the best people to know how to save energy. So what you can usually do is not interact with their core process, but interact with the systems around. So I mentioned heat recovery, but you can also, if they have systems to produce steam, maybe you can look at the system producing steam. If you have a system producing compressed air, you can look at improving this system. So it's very, you will have a few standard things that you can do with some industrials and a lot of things that only them can do because it's part of their core business. Plus, usually it's so close to their core business that they don't want anyone to touch it. They prefer to manage it by themselves. They don't want any ESCO to come and start interacting with their systems. So it's a totally different game, but there is a lot of gain to be done. And I think probably they are the people that have been working on this the first because they've always tried to financially improve their costs and energy in some cases. For some industries, it's just a few % of their bill, and therefore they've not done much. But many industrials, the energy is really significant in terms of how much they spend every month. that they've been working on this for quite some time. And similarly to what we said before, there's a lot of innovation there also. A lot of things that are happening. I see in Europe with all the issues that have happened with Ukraine, with the supply of gas, people are trying to get rid of gas. So there's a lot of innovation around getting rid of gas and replacing gas with electricity, with biomass, with other things. There's a lot of innovation also there.
So because they're incentivized already, they have a lower ceiling of improvements, is what you would say.
Yeah, but still they will face, and that's what I see with my job now. They are all those industrials. They are facing the same issue of I will not invest in something that does not pay back for more than 2 years or 3 years. Even some clients, it's 1 year. So if there is something that I need to install that will pay back in 1 year and a half, I will not invest because my criteria is 1 year.
Right.
Which is crazy. It's totally crazy. But that's where we can help, because if we come with a solution that helps to finance those projects that they would not do themselves, then that works. If they need to replace things, but that pays back in 5 years, so they will not do it. They will wait for the system to break down. But if you come and say, I will invest for you, and you just pay by the savings that are generated, usually that's a win-win solution.
That makes sense as well. Before we conclude, I just want to touch a bit on demand side management and data. We talked a little bit about how data can be gathered from buildings. And obviously, once you have that data, there's a lot of things you can do. One of them is you tell the people using the building, whether they're residential again, or commercial, or even industrial. But based on what you were just saying, I guess I can remove the industrial from that. So just for commercial and residential buildings, once you're able to essentially tell people, okay, you're using this amount of electricity on this and this amount on this, the expectation is that they will reduce it. But I think DSM strategies in general is one of those things that I've seen done so differently in different countries. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, especially obviously having seen how it's done here in the Middle East and how it is in France. What do you think the sort of differences are? What do you think the room for growth is, if you will, in both these areas?
Yeah, I think DSM strategies are, as you say, it's very different usually by country. And it's also very different in the way it's being tackled and financed. In many countries, it's being financed through incentives or tax reductions. In the Middle East, not so much. So then it's different ways. It's trying to organize things better. And that's maybe why, for me, it's why there was, for example, a Super ESCO created in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi, because it's part of the DSM. And they saw that to be able to tackle existing buildings, you need to have an organization that will look only after this. So putting a Super ESCO is a good thing to do. Where in some other countries, like in Europe, you don't have so many Super ESCOs because it's being tackled differently. It's like, okay, to do this, either you put a new law or you have tax rebate so that people will do it voluntarily, or you put incentives so that people think, oh, it's going to be cheaper to do it. But yeah, I think it's very important. DSM, I like the way it's being done in the Middle East because it's very well organized with articulated programs, which have usually dedicated owners, and there's a follow-up of each program all the time. Every year there is a report and you see the progress. It's quite well done. In some other countries, like my country in France, it's not so obvious. You don't have very much view on what has been done, what's the exact strategy. It goes sometimes in all directions at the same time. Yeah, I think it's being handled completely differently, depending on how the governments are being organized and how they tackle that thing. But I like very much the way it's being done in the UAE. I think it's very logical and very organized.
When I think about it, a lot of times I've had so many discussions with people. People really think lighting, for example, is such a huge user of electricity. And almost just educating people. I remember when I was young, there was ads on TV. Oh, turn off your lights. You don't want to waste electricity. But really, that's sometimes 10 to 15% of the energy expenditure, right?
You know why? It's what I explained to you earlier. It's visible. Lights are visible.
Right.
So the light is on, people see it and they say, oh, I must switch it off, or I need to replace it with better lights. because it's very visible. But something that is in the basement, nobody really cares about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that's the thing. Honestly, for me, one of the things I didn't realize was the laundry, especially if you use the heater, like the, what do you call it, the drying settings in the laundry. It's a very big user of electricity, especially if you don't have the sort of newer models that are much more energy efficient. So you don't realize, but it could cost you a big chunk of money just because you're using the dryer setting instead of just hanging your clothes or whatever you might be able to do. The oven is something that, again, because I think heating and cooling in general of any kind require much more electricity, if I'm not mistaken, than sound and light. So just having that understanding, I think, would just completely change the way I personally interact with my surroundings. If I'm leaving the room, I turn off the AC. But the light, I'm still trying to turn off because it's built into my personality now. But I'm not as fussy with. But the AC, no, it has to be off. And I think that switch in itself is, maybe it's not so much demand side management as it is a cultural fix, but still, I think that plays a big role into all of this.
Yeah, behaviors. I think what you're touching about is around behaviors of people. And I've been working a little bit with a company that is organizing behavioral education. And this has been deployed in Dubai. So if you look at your electricity bill, or I don't know if they send messages, but they will tell you that you consume more or less than your neighbors. And this has a huge...
If the building is sub-metered, though, which it isn't always.
Yeah, if you have your own meter, yes. But this is, and I was amazed when I met that company the first time. They were telling me, yes, if we tell you to reduce your consumption, it will have absolutely zero effect. If we tell you, oh, your neighbor is consuming less than you, like, oh, okay,
That's
I need to do something.
That's very interesting.
And that's really the behavior. And this company has been really making a business out of this, selling their services to all the big utilities. And again, this has been deployed in Dubai, and you get those messages that, I don't know, you are in the top 10 consumers, or on the reverse, you are the worst consumers compared to people of the similar situation than you. And this is when you start to tell people that they compare in a certain way with others, that's where apparently people would react.
That's very interesting. Playing into people's competitive nature, I think. You're 100% right. And I mean, even some of the other things we talked about, having the labeling of the building very obvious, or maybe not even labeling, right? The dollar amounts that you could potentially save versus a building that is next to it that is less energy efficient. I think things like that can make almost as much of a difference as just changing all the technology. It's just that we don't really think about it as much because it's easier to change a light bulb or to change an HVAC unit than it is to change people's minds. So we always focus on the things that are easier to do than the long-term factors. Anything else you'd like to add? Any other thoughts you have?
No, just maybe telling everybody who's listening to us, and if they're still listening to us after almost 2 hours, that's good for us. But that's an important subject, and that people should look at acting in their daily life, trying to understand, if they don't manage this subject, trying to understand better what consumes exactly what you said, what small actions they do every day that have an impact. And I think that's something that everybody should now look at, and it's becoming very important. Plus, at the end of the month, if they do the right things, they will make savings. So that's always a benefit that they will get. So for me, yeah, I'm also extremely careful now in the way I'm using energy in my home. So that's something that I think everybody should start to do.
I think every bit helps. That's really the aim here, right? One of the thoughts I have is, I have so many friends and colleagues who are in the retrofitting industry like yourself, and they always say, I have so much trouble, like you were saying in the beginning, I have so much trouble explaining to people what I do. Maybe it's better now, maybe it's more, but maybe this episode serves as like a bulwark to just anyone who asks you what is retrofitting, you share this and they maybe understand it at least a little bit better. That was the hope, at least.
Yeah, very good.
Perfect. Anything else you'd like our listeners to be aware of? Any news you have coming up? You mentioned SOFIAC. Anything else that we should keep an eye out for that you have coming in the near future?
Yeah, I think for me now, I'm really focusing on activities in France. And so people who are interested, they can just go check SOFIAC. So it's sofiac.eu, our website, and they will see what we're doing. We're planning a big launch after the summer. So it's going to be very interesting. But yeah, that's about it.
Perfect. Okay, then. Thank you so much for your time, Stephane. It was an absolute pleasure speaking to you and going over all these brainstorming exercises. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks to you. Thanks a lot for organizing this. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate it.